I'm Richard Gerver, and mental toughness. The phrase was first coined in the 1980s by performance psychologists working with elite athletes, trying to find that extra edge. I'm Richard Gerver, and I've spent over a decade working with elite athletes and coaches and in high-performance businesses, helping them to develop techniques for mental toughness. And on this course, I want to work with you as aspiring leaders, as experienced leaders. We're going to explore the techniques around resilience, around self-belief, around self-confidence and self-leadership that will allow you to spend less time managing and more time leading. A few years ago, I remember listening to a conversation with the legendary soccer player Rio Ferdinand, who played for many years for Manchester United, who at the time were probably the greatest soccer team in the world, managed by the legendary Sir Alex Ferguson. And as he was talking, he was reflecting on his regrets. And his biggest regret when he looked back on his long and illustrious career was the fact that he never took time to celebrate the successes that he had. He was always thinking about what next, or the things that hadn't gone well. He never stopped to remember those good times and those special moments. And I think it's really important for all of us to take time and find ways to celebrate those special moments in our lives. Because the danger is, with most of us, our instinct is never to spot or even recognize those moments of success. We're always too busy looking at the things that didn't work or haven't gone right. Think about your workday, for example. You might get 99 letters from a satisfied customer saying things had gone really well and they loved your service. But you won't remember those because the one you go home worried about is the one letter of complaint. You have that meeting with your manager as you review your year, and the manager's incredibly complimentary about most of the things you've done. And then they talk to you about one or two development points. Well, again, the same thing. When you reflect on that meeting, you don't reflect on what's gone well. All you do is obsess about what's gone badly. And that's really difficult for us because it's not helping any of us in those situations. It's so important when you're developing mental toughness to be galvanized and sure about self-belief, because so much of mental toughness is about the perception of the challenges that face you. And if you've got a little bank of the successes in your mind, those moments where you've succeeded, those moments where you've celebrated success, that feeling those great moments give you, it gives you the strength and confidence to be able to take on that next challenge. Even that moment where you've made a customer's day, you've made them smile, or a manager's turned round to you and patted you on the back and said, you know what, that was a great job, well done. And in those moments, it's really important not just to acknowledge them, but to celebrate them. And I always think about them in terms of treats, treats, treats. If you have those moments, go enjoy a piece of chocolate that you never allow yourself to have. Go out for a meal with friends and family. Ring a bell. Do whatever it is that allows you to capture the memory in that moment. And for some of us, I'm well aware that it's really difficult to spot, acknowledge, and celebrate those moments for so many reasons. One, because we're so busy. Two, because we're under so much pressure. Or three, that we just feel uncomfortable celebrating how good we can be. And it's really important when you feel like that to have an acknowledgement buddy. A friend, somebody you know, love, trust, respect, who can be that third eye for you, who can tap you on the shoulder when those special moments happen. The message from a customer, the great compliment from a boss. They tap you on the shoulder and say, do you realize what's just happened? This has just happened. Go on, write it down. Remember the moment in a snapshot. And most importantly, they encourage you to go out and celebrate it. If you can get that system into your procedure, into your way of thinking, then you'll be able to capture those moments of success and use them in the dark moments or the challenging moments, because it'll help you remember just how good you can be. I was recently working with a young tennis player who was really concerned because she was finding that her performance was hampered in the middle of a big match, a game she should win, with mental lapses in concentration. She would describe it coming off court after a loss in saying, "I don't know what happened. I just couldn't think sharply mentally." And when we sat down and we talked and we looked at her routine, we realized that she was one of those young athletes. She was so keen to do the right thing for everybody around her. She would agree to every request, whether it was meeting a sponsor or talking to somebody in the media, going into a journalistic interview the day before a major game. And because she was saying yes to everything, when she took the field of play to do the job she was actually paid to do, she was finding herself in a really difficult position because that mental strength just wasn't there. And the truth is, it's common of all of us, isn't it? Whether we're athletes or people working in any other context, we are all so keen to do the right thing by other people, that whenever we're asked to help somebody with a problem or engage in what somebody else is doing, our instinct is always to say yes. We want to feel valuable. We want to feel that the people we work with are valued. We don't want to say no or walk away. We don't want to appear selfish. We want to feel that we're team players, engaged and involved and collaborative all of the time. And the irony is that whilst that can be great on the surface, when we have to dig deep, as that young athlete did, to find that mental strength to overcome real challenge, we might not have the pool of energy left because we've given it away too often. That young tennis player, for example, learned to say no. She learned to audit when it was okay to give her energy to other people and when she needed to focus in and preserve that energy for the big game. And as a result, she started to win more. So what's really important is that you go through a very similar process, that you audit when a request comes in from a colleague over a whole range of things. You need to be able to think to yourself, is this something that I need to be engaged in right now? Or is this something that actually the asker can do by themselves? Is this something I can talk about and say, look, let's do it later because right now I've got to focus on what I'm working on? You've got to be able to develop that confidence to audit and say yes and no at the right time. And I think the way you do that is to start to build that routine in yourself, to be prepared to be selfish and to self-reflect. You know, the great immortal basketball player, Michael Jordan, would always take care of his own business first. He was always make sure that he was at the peak of his own fitness, that he got his own training in first, because he knew that if he did that, he'd be in tip-top performance. And if he was in tip-top performance, then he was able to give better to other people. So remember that saying no isn't selfish at all. In fact, in many ways, it's the best way to give back to the people around you. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to be just a little bit more Michael Jordan. I want you to block out space in your diary, put a do not disturb sign on your door, send an email to your colleagues to say, right now I'm working on something, so please, if you need to talk to me, do it tomorrow because I need the energy for myself. Give it a go. And actually you'll see the world doesn't fall in and nobody feels badly for you. And if you do it once, you'll do it again. It'll become a habit. And saying no will go from being a negative to being a definite positive. Do you remember where you were when you first realized the severity of the COVID crisis? I do. I had just done an event in Australia and flown home, and had sat down on the evening I got back and watched the news. And I was listening for the first time about how society was going to lock down and things were going to change. And it was at that moment I realized that this was going to have a profound impact on my professional life. Because as a professional traveling speaker, that work stopped almost overnight. And I remember the feeling waking up the next morning. I was in complete paralysis. I was frozen almost in fear. The change that had been done to me meant that all of a sudden I was in a deep reactive mode. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know how to regain control. And as a result, I didn't know what to do. And after I'd been through that initial paralysis, I started to go into a phase of denial. I started to think to myself, maybe it's not really going to happen. Maybe this COVID thing will go away quicker than we believe. Maybe actually the phone will ring, the emails will come back saying, we made a mistake, Richard. We still do need you to travel to the next event. We've still got plenty of work lined up for you. And for a while, I even persuaded myself that the change wasn't real. When it struck me that it was, I spent time getting really angry. I was angry at the people who were canceling the events. I was angry at my agent. I was angry at COVID. I was angry at politicians because I just couldn't find a way to grapple back control. And when the anger didn't work out, then I went through a period of listlessness, almost mild depression. I found myself not really caring or bothering. Some days I didn't even get out of bed. But it was at that point I gave myself a really good talking to and actually said, you've got a free pass here, Richard. You've been through those first 4 phases of change, but you need to do something now to take back a sense of control. You need to stop feeling like a victim and you need to be more proactive and less reactive. And it was at that point I just started to explore the possibilities. I started to think, okay, well, I can't perform live on a stage, but what can I do? So I started to ask questions about virtual presentations and how I could build maybe a studio in my office that would allow me to deliver really good quality ones. I started to speak to tech people about how that could become a reality. I started to look about equipment and try to understand lighting and camera work and computer technology. And what was really interesting was how my psyche shifted, because suddenly I felt like I had a purpose again, like I had levers of control. And that allowed me to move on and gain the confidence to move into what I call the activation phase. Because then I was talking to my agents about my new offer. I was making sure that potential clients and existing clients knew what I could do. I was making sample virtual presentations for them to see. And all of a sudden, I felt that control flood back. And because I felt that control flood back, I felt better about the change that had been imposed on me in the first place. And more importantly than that, it gave me the confidence to believe that whatever COVID threw up next, I would find a route map through it. And that's what I ask you to consider as you think and reflect on the troubles through the COVID crisis and whatever legacy that has left behind for you. It's okay to go through those phases of paralysis, of denial, of anger, of even mild depression. But the sooner you start to ask questions, the sooner you put your head up above the parapet and say, okay, this has happened, but what can I do about it? Is the point at which you take back control. And that'll give you the mental strength to take on the challenge, whatever it is and however it shows itself. So start asking questions as soon as you can. On the 6th of July, 2005, a fun-loving young professional woman called Martine Wright went out with her friends to celebrate a special event that had occurred in London that day. Because on that day, the 6th of July, 2005, London had been awarded the Olympic and Paralympic Games for 2012. It was an amazing moment. I remember it. I was in London at the time. So she went out after work and she partied. She partied hard. Actually, she probably partied just a little bit too hard. Because the next morning, her usual routine was knocked slightly. She didn't catch the train she usually catch to work. She had to catch a later one. And unfortunately, on that same train, on the 7th of July, 2005, was one of the terrorists who was involved in the 7/7 bombing attacks in London. And as a result, Martine was caught up in that, and her life changed irrevocably. Now, what was really interesting and so powerful about Martine's story was her routine, her life had been disrupted for the first time. She loved order, she loved routine, she loved her life, but all of a sudden that was shattered. Now, the thing is that Martine didn't panic. She didn't mourn the loss. And thanks to her friends, she started to develop new experiences and new things. And one of those new experiences was learning to play sitting volleyball. And she actually found she loved it. Not only did she love it, she was really good at it. In fact, she was fantastically good at it. She was so good at it that when the 2012 Paralympic Games came around, she was selected to represent Team GB in the sitting volleyball tournament. Now, in her normal routine, Martine may well have bought a ticket, sat in the stands, and watched the games along with the rest of us. But all of a sudden, she was a participant. Now, it can't always and should never, hopefully, take a life-changing moment like Martine's for the rest of us to step out of our comfort zone. The problem is, we love our routines, most of us. We build our lives in the way we want them. We have our routines, we have our daily systems. We head to work, we grab a coffee on the way, the same cup of coffee. We head into the office, we say hello to the same faces. We get on with our job in the same way. We maybe go to a bar afterwards or take part in the same sports. We go home, we eat the same food, and life turns and life goes on. And in a way, it's the way we were taught to be. Lockdown certainty, lockdown life. And that way, everything will work smoothly for you. But the truth is, the lesson that Martine had in the worst kind of way is the lesson that so many of us have in so many ways. Although we try and lock down our routines and our systems, life just isn't like that. And every single one of us will have been thrown a curveball at some point. The really important thing is to know that you can deal with that curveball when it comes along. And if all you do is you avoid new things and you avoid changes in your routine, when that curveball comes, it's going to come so fast you're going to miss it. You'll panic, you'll avoid it, and the point is you just can't. So the key here with mental toughness is to make sure you've got the confidence to deal with the curveball. And that requires practice. So what I say to you is, you need, even if your routine works smooth and lovely, you need to find moments to shake it up. You need to furnish your life with new experiences so often. You need to take on new challenges, even small ones. So in the office, for example, if you have a routine, change it. If you talk to the same people first thing in the morning, change who you talk to first thing in the morning. If you have a particular way you like your pens and pencils laid out on your desk, or you go to the photocopier or have your cup of coffee at the same time, change the routine. The point is, it doesn't have to be seismic, and hopefully it never has to be life-changing in the way Martine's are. But the thing is, if you shake up that routine, if you try new things, when the curveball comes, you'll be able to knock it out of the park. So give it a go, build that element of your mental toughness, and remember, no 2 days are ever the same. When you're struggling with an issue, an event, a set of circumstances, it's really easy to lose a sense of perspective as control for it seems to take on its own momentum. We find it really difficult to be logical, to take the steps necessary to regain control, to regain a mastery of the problem we're dealing with. And I first heard Martin Seligman, the great psychologist, talk about a 6-question cycle, which allows you to frame the problem in a way that's controllable again. And I want to share those with you now. And I want to use the example of a professional soccer coach that I've been working with. Recently, because of the COVID crisis, he lost his job really suddenly at a moment he least expected. And I remember his sense of panic when he connected with me. And I said, come on, let's try this process together. So I'm going to use his example here. So the first question Seligman asks is, what is the absolute worst thing that could happen here? Well, with this coach, it was that his reputation would be damaged, that he'd never be able to find another job because the market was uber competitive, or that the system might move on without him and leave his coaching techniques behind. that leads us to the second question. And the second question is, so what measures could you take to stop the worst thing from happening? Well, in his case, it was making sure that he used the time wisely to maybe catch up on the latest techniques, the latest coaching ideas, to make sure that he was up to date when the moment came that he might get another job. Think about it in your context. The same thing could well happen. Those really unfortunate moments where you lose your job, where suddenly your career has to take a new direction. It's all too easy to sit there and let the worst happen. But make sure that you prevent that by going to that second question. The next question is really interesting. And when I talked to the coach, it was a fascinating moment to see his eyes light up. Because I said to him, what's the very best thing that could happen now? And he said, well, that might be being phoned by the best soccer teams in the world and being asked to go and work and coach for them. So the fourth question is, so what actions could you take to make the very best thing happen? He said, well, maybe it's to sweat my network, to find out somebody who knows the head coach or the CEO at one of those world-class franchises, to see if they could get me an entry point, a meeting, an introduction. And at that point, we both smiled at each other. So that crossroads in your career, where you think the very best thing that could happen to me is the job I've always wanted. And again, that crucial question, what could you do to make it happen? Now, the truth is we're not dealing with fantasies here. So it might well be that the great clubs in the world never call. The great job that you're really after never materializes. But the point is, we're now in a position where we're feeling good again, we're feeling positive again, and that leads us to the fifth of Seligman's questions. And that's this. What is the most likely thing that could happen right now? And with the coach, it was that actually another club calls, another organization wants my support, wants my expertise, is prepared to offer me a job. Which leads to the sixth question, which is, so what action do you need to take to make the most likely thing happen? And he started talking about sending out CVs and video clips of his coaching to other clubs in the neighborhood or organizations that he thought might be ready or looking to hire new people. Now, the process really is not about the end game and whether he ended up at the world-class club or in another job that was similar to the one he had, or even a slight career change. The point was he felt in control of a situation that began to spiral out of control. So the next time you start to feel that, cycle through those questions. What's the worst thing that can happen? What can you do? What's the very best thing that could happen? What could you do? What's the most likely thing to happen? What could you do? And by the time you've been through Seligman's questions, you'll have enough confidence and mental strength to know you can cope with whatever that original situation was. Self-efficacy is the psychological state that inhabits all of us in some degree or another and defines how confident we are in our own abilities to overcome challenges and issues that we might face in our life. In many ways, we hear about self-efficacy as the holy grail in professional sports. All athletes are coached and trained. And the real holy grail is the athletes and teams that find themselves able to cope with the problems and challenges they face in the field of play without a coach's intervention. In other words, that ability to self-manage, the confidence to deal with the issue without having to go to somebody in a more senior or more hierarchical position. And it's really interesting because so many of us have a reflex as a coach, as a manager, to interject, to intervene in people's lives if we see them struggling. And so we tend to overmanage people. And that's a real challenge because if we overmanage, if we step in It means as part of that vicious circle, those people we're managing never gain the confidence to lead and manage themselves. Their self-efficacy never grows. And it's a problem, actually, that begins for many of us in childhood. You know, so you hear the term a helicopter parent. And what that means is, with the best intentions at heart as a parent, if one of our children is struggling to read a word or with a math problem, we step in too quickly, too soon. We help them out too quickly, too soon. And as a result, they never grow the self-confidence and self-belief when they're alone to deal with the challenge for themselves. And it develops a reliance culture. One of the most important things in developing self-efficacy in others, and one of the hardest things to bestow, is trust. You take a coach on a field. The coach wants to win. They want to do a great job. And the question is, do they trust their athletes enough to take responsibility for themselves? As a manager, you want to win. You want to do great work. Do you trust your staff to make the decisions for themselves? And sometimes you need to be able to let go in order for them to grow. So what we need to do are develop very clear strategies whereby we develop that self-efficacy in the people we work with and work for us. So really it's key that when you're managing people, you don't believe that you have to provide the answers, that you have to provide the solutions, that you have to protect your colleagues from making mistakes or dealing with errors. The key is to guide them, mentor them, ask them the right questions so that they find a way to solve the problem for themselves. You take to the field of play as an athlete, and you're the coach that's got that right. In overtime, when the crunch is about to hit, in that moment where the two teams are locked in combat, and the difference is going to come from the team that can think fastest and think different, you know as a coach, that's the moment that your team is going to snatch victory. And it's the same thing professionally. So make sure that you don't give answers too easily or step in too early. Make sure that you take a step back and know in so doing, you're not abdicating responsibility. You're developing self-efficacy in the people who need it most. In the early 2000s, I took on the greatest challenge of my own career. I became the principal of a failing school, a failing organization. Now, amongst many of the different and diverse challenges we faced was a very personal one for me, because the team I inherited was filled with really lovely people. They were great. They were nice to each other. They were lovely to the children. They were great with the community. Everybody loved them. The problem was they were so settled that they didn't want to face the problems we actually had to deal with. And that meant that I, as a leader, had to be mentally tough to make some really challenging calls. And the first of those is one that you might face, which is to make sure you get the right people in the room. One of the things you need to think about is that consensus is not necessarily a good thing. In other words, if you fill your team with like-minded people who all think and behave in the same way, who all do the same things at the same times, who are all familiar with each other and like the way things work, you're not necessarily going to be able to address the tough things when they come along. So you need to make sure you fill your team with the right kinds of people. And that means occasionally you're going to have to hire people, you're going to have to fire people. For me, that was one of the great challenges I faced as a principal. Despite how nice they were, there were people I needed to lose. There were people who just weren't right for the chemistry of the team, and that was tough. And at the same time, I had to hire people, some of whom scared me. They were mavericks. They were rock and roll. They were a little bit edgy, but I knew that would add to the chemistry of my team. And when I reflect on other scenarios and situations, I realize how powerful that is, because that's the point at which the ideas and the confidence to take on a challenge happen. The key as a leader is to nurture the vision and values you believe in, to have a real sense of purpose for what you want to have that team have in common. Take, for example, the legendary basketball team, the Chicago Bulls, that team that won championship after championship. The genius of the coaching setup there was to realize that you couldn't have players all in one mold. You didn't want a squad of players who were all Michael Jordan, who thought like Michael Jordan or behaved like Michael Jordan. You had to have the Scottie Pippins. You even had to have the Dennis Rodmans. But the key was to galvanize those people behind your vision and your values, to have the mental toughness and strength to know that you needed to let them off the leash, to allow the chemistry to mix. And if you let that chemistry mix, then incredible things would happen. For me, in my own experience, those tough calls early on, that commitment to vision, values, and purpose, bringing together a team of diverse people, meant that our school that had been failing for 10 years went from being one of the worst schools in the United Kingdom, in the bottom 5%, to being in the top 3% within 2 years. Magic comes from mental toughness. So begin with making some of those calls you really feel uncomfortable about, because they're going to be the ones that get the chemistry going. Mental toughness. So we've moved to understand some of the techniques that we can all apply with the people we manage and lead, the resilience, the self-belief and self-confidence, the ability to try, make mistakes, fail, and come back. But like all journeys, you can't start at the end. You have to start at the beginning. And that beginning is you. So what I ask you to consider now, as you leave our course, is how you can develop those same behaviors and techniques and practices in yourself. Because if you can master them personally, you can share them with others. And if you can share them with others, you're ready to lead that culture of mental toughness. Thank you so much for participating in this course with me. If you'd like to know more, you can find me on LinkedIn. My Twitter address is @RichardGerver. My website, richardgerver.com. My books, Change and Simple Thinking. Good luck, and I hope you'll join me again for one of my other courses in the future. Thank you.